Welcome to the London Gritty Chronicles. I am your narrator, and today we are embarking on a journey that changed the human species forever. Imagine a single thread of silk. It is thin, beautiful, and seemingly fragile. But if you weave enough threads together, you create a rope strong enough to pull a ship, or a web tight enough to trap the entire world. Today, we are looking at the most famous web in human history, the Silk Road. We often think of the Silk Road as a romantic path filled with spices, jewels, and adventures. But in the mid-14th century, this network of trade did something else. It turned the world into a single, biological room. It connected distant lungs and bloodstreams. And because of that connection, a silent killer was able to walk from the steppes of Central Asia to the bedrooms of London. This is the story of medieval globalization. It is a story about how humanity built a machine for wealth, only to realize that the machine had a fatal flaw. Connectivity increases risk. By the end of this hour, you will not only understand the Black Death and the trade routes that carried it, you will master the English vocabulary of commerce, geography, and movement. Let's begin in the year 1345. We are standing on the endless grassy plains of Central Asia. The wind here blows constantly. It is a harsh, dry landscape. In English, we call this geography the steppes. A steppe is a large area of flat, unforested grassland. Listen to the sound in the distance. It is a low rumble, like thunder, but the sky is clear. As it gets closer, you distinguish the sound of hooves, thousands of them. This is a caravan. A caravan is a group of people, especially traders or pilgrims, traveling together across a desert in Asia or North Africa. Notice the stress on the first syllable. Caravan. This specific caravan is massive. It consists of hundreds of camels, horses, and heavy wagons. They are carrying precious commodities. A commodity is a raw material or primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold. In this era, the commodities are furs from the north, spices from India, and rolls of silk from China. But they are carrying something else, hidden in the fur, hidden in the grain sacks, hidden in the blood of the rats scurrying beneath the wagons. To understand why this caravan is here, we must look at the political map of 1345. At this time, much of Asia and Eastern Europe was under the control of the Mongol Empire. Specifically, this region is ruled by the Golden Horde. Historians often use a Latin phrase to describe this era: Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. It sounds positive, doesn't it? Peace usually is. But this peace was enforced by the sword. Because the Mongols controlled the entire route from China to the Black Sea, they made travel safe. Before the Mongols, if you tried to walk from Beijing to Baghdad, you would likely be robbed or killed by local warlords. But under the Pax Mongolica, a merchant could travel with a golden plate on his head and not be molested. Here is a key English term for you: infrastructure. Infrastructure refers to the basic physical and organizational structures needed for the operation of a society or enterprise. Today, we think of roads and power lines. In 1345, the Mongol infrastructure was the Yam system, a network of relay stations. Every 20 or 30 miles there was a station. A tired rider could swap his exhausted horse for a fresh one. A hungry merchant could find food. This system accelerated the speed of travel. Information, goods, and people moved faster than ever before. This speed is crucial. In English, we say the world became interconnected. To be interconnected means to be mutually joined or related. The merchant at the front of our caravan, let's call him Al-Hassan, doesn't know he is part of a global machine. He only cares about profit. He wants to reach the next hub. A hub is the effective center of an activity, region, or network. In aviation today, London Heathrow is a hub. In 1345, the great hubs were cities like Sarai on the Volga River or Tabriz in modern-day Iran. Al-Hassan is leading his camels toward Tana, a bustling port on the Black Sea. He calculates his margins. He worries about the weather. He worries about the price of pepper. He does not worry about his health. He feels fine. The men around him feel fine. But the speed of the Mongol infrastructure has created a trap. If travel was slow, if it took months to cross the desert, a sick man would die on the road. The disease would burn itself out in the empty wilderness. It would never reach the city. But because the infrastructure is so efficient, the caravan moves quickly. The rats in the wagons breed quickly. The fleas on the rats jump quickly. The disease survives the journey because the journey is short enough. This is the paradox of globalization. The same efficiency that creates wealth also creates vulnerability. Let's use an analytical phrase here. Supply chain. A supply chain is the sequence of processes involved in the production and distribution of a commodity. Al-Hassan is a link in the supply chain. He is moving goods from the east to the west. He believes he is bringing luxury to the Europeans. He believes he is bringing civilization. But as the sun sets over the steppes, casting long shadows across the grass, we can see the invisible passenger riding on the back of his camel. The bacterium is called Yersinia pestis. It is ancient. It has been sleeping in the soil of Central Asia for centuries, living quietly in the burrowing marmots. But now, the trade routes have disturbed it. The hunger for commodities has woken the sleeper. As the caravan settles down for the night, the men gather around a fire. They speak a mix of languages: Persian, Turkic, Italian. They are the agents of connection. They share food. They share stories. They share the very air they breathe. One of the drivers coughs. It is a dry, small cough. Nobody looks up. In the dusty steppe, everyone coughs. But this cough is different. In the shadows, a flea jumps from a dying marmot carcass onto a rat that creates a nest in a saddlebag. The rat climbs onto the wagon. The wagon rolls west toward the great market cities, where millions of people live packed together in narrow streets. The web is complete. The trap is set. The golden web of the Silk Road, built for gold and glory, has become a highway for death. We often say in English that something went viral. Today, we mean a video on the internet. But the word viral comes from virus. It describes something that spreads rapidly and uncontrollably through a population. The Silk Road was the first internet. and in 1345, it was about to upload a virus that would delete half the population of Europe. How did it start? Where exactly did this biological bomb detonate? To find the answer, we must leave the caravan and travel to a beautiful, crystal-clear lake surrounded by snow-capped mountains. A place that looks like paradise, but was actually ground zero. History is often written in ink, but sometimes it is written in stone. We are standing on the shores of Lake Issyk in modern-day Kyrgyzstan. The water is deep blue, fed by glacial streams. It is stunningly beautiful. But in the 19th century, archaeologists made a chilling discovery here. They found 2 cemeteries filled with tombstones from the years 1338 and 1339. This date is critical. It is nearly a decade before the plague hit London. On these stones, written in the Syriac language, is a specific word, motana. In English, this translates to pestilence. A pestilence is a fatal epidemic disease. For years, historians debated if this pestilence was actually the Black Death. Was this the starting line? In 2022, deep research using DNA analysis provided the answer. Scientists extracted genetic material from the teeth of the skeletons buried here. They found the undeniable signature of Yersinia pestis. This lakeside trading post was ground zero. Let's look at the people buried here. They were not local farmers. They were merchants. A merchant is a person involved in wholesale trade, especially one dealing with foreign countries. These merchants were wealthy. They wore fine silk. They had traveled thousands of miles. They lived at the intersection of the world, buying furs from the north and selling spices to the west. They were the globalizers of the 14th century, but their success was their undoing. Nature has a way of interacting with economics. In the years leading up to 1338, the climate in Central Asia changed. It became wetter and warmer. In English, we call this a fluctuation. A fluctuation is an irregular rising and falling in number or amount. This climate fluctuation caused the population of marmots and rats to explode. When the dry season returned, the rodents were forced to move closer to human food stores, closer to the grain sacks of the merchants. This is where biology meets business. The fleas, starving as their rodent hosts died, looked for a new meal. They found the merchants. Imagine the scene at the lake, a bustling market, deals being struck in different languages, the smell of roasting meat, and amidst the noise, a merchant feels a small itch on his ankle. He scratches it. He thinks nothing of it. He concludes his business, packs his wagon, and joins the caravan heading west toward the Black Sea. He is now a vector. In medical English, a vector is an organism, typically a biting insect or tick, that transmits a disease or parasite from one animal or plant to another. But in our story, the human being becomes the vehicle for the vector. The caravan leaves Lake Issyk. It travels across the arid plains, heading for the great interface between Asia and Europe, the city of Kaffa. Let's learn a useful phrasal verb here. To set off. To set off means to begin a journey. Example: the caravan set off for the coast, unaware of the danger. As they travel, the disease incubates. Incubation is the period between exposure to an infection and the appearance of the first symptoms. This delay is crucial. If the disease killed instantly, the caravan would have stopped. But because of the incubation period, the caravan keeps moving. It covers hundreds of miles. The bacteria are silently multiplying in the blood of the travelers. By 1345, the disease has reached the Golden Horde army, which is besieging the city of Kaffa on the Crimean Peninsula. This brings us to one of the most controversial and terrifying moments in history. Kaffa, today the city of Feudalism, was a Genoese trading colony. The Genoese were Italians from the city of Genoa. They were the masters of the Mediterranean Sea. They had built a fortress at Kaffa to control trade with the Mongols. The relationship was tense. The Mongols wanted tax money. The Italians wanted profit. Tensions boiled over, and the Mongol army, led by Khan Johnny Beg, surrounded the city. In English military vocabulary, this is called a siege. A siege is a military operation in which enemy forces surround a town or building, cutting off essential supplies with the aim of compelling the surrender of those inside. Picture the scene: the high stone walls of Kaffa. Inside, the Italians are trapped, looking out at the endless tents of the Mongol army. They are terrified of the Mongol swords. But then, the Mongol camp goes quiet. The Italians watching from the walls notice something strange. The Mongol soldiers are not attacking. They are dying. A mysterious illness is sweeping through the besieging army. Men are collapsing with high fevers. Large black swellings appear in their armpits and groins. These swellings are called buboes. This is why we call it the bubonic plague. The Mongol army is dissolving. Panic spreads. The commanders realize they cannot win the siege if all their soldiers are dead. They prepare to retreat. But before they leave, Khan Johnny Beg makes a decision that changes history. It is an act of biological warfare, perhaps the first in recorded history. He orders his men to load their catapults. But they do not load stones. They do not load fire pots. They drag the rotting, infected corpses of their dead comrades and place them into the throwing mechanisms. The wooden arms of the catapults snap forward. The dead bodies fly through the air, arching over the high stone walls of Kaffa. This is a gruesome image, but we must analyze it. The Italians inside the city are horrified. Bodies are raining from the sky. They crash into the streets, into the water cisterns, onto the roofs of the houses. The Italians run to dump the bodies into the sea, trying to clean their city. But it is too late. The liquid from the bodies, the fleas on the clothes, the very dust in the air, everything is now contaminated. The containment has failed. Containment is the action of keeping something harmful under control or within limits. The Italians think they are fleeing death. They rush to their ships. These are galleys, long wooden ships powered by wind and oars. They untie the ropes. They row frantically away from the horror of Kaffa. They believe the sea will save them. They set sail for Italy, for home. They do not realize that they are not refugees. They are the delivery system, The ships moving across the Black Sea are carrying the deadliest cargo in human history. They are heading toward the unsuspecting ports of the Mediterranean: Constantinople, Sicily, Genoa, Venice. The Golden Web has become a trap. The hub at Lake Issyk-Kul sent the signal to the hub at Kaffa. And now Kaffa is sending the signal to the heart of Europe. Why did the Europeans have no defense? Why was their world so fragile? To understand the scale of the catastrophe that is about to hit, we must look at the Europe of 1347. It was a continent already on the brink of collapse, teeming with people, struggling with famine, and completely unprepared for what was coming over the horizon. Let's sail west with the Genoese ships. The year is 1347. The journey from the Black Sea to Italy is long. In the cramped, damp holds of the galleys, the sailors begin to fall ill. They develop the same symptoms they saw in Kaffa: shivering, vomiting blood, and the terrifying black boils. By the time these ships reach the port of Messina in Sicily, most of the crew are either dead or dying. The dock workers in Messina see the ships drifting into the harbor. They row out to help. They climb aboard. They see the horror. They immediately try to leave, but the contact has already happened. In English, we call this the point of entry. The point of entry is the specific location where a person or object enters a country or system. Messina is the first domino. But why was Europe so vulnerable? Why did the plague kill not just 10% or 20%, but up to 60% of the population in some areas? The answer lies in the state of Europe itself. We often think of disaster as a single event, a lightning strike. But historians know that disaster is usually a convergence. A convergence is the coming together of two or more things to the same point. In 1347, Europe was experiencing a convergence of three critical weaknesses. First, overpopulation. In the centuries before the plague, Europe's population had exploded. Forests were cut down to make farmland. People moved into crowded, unsanitary cities. London, Paris, and Florence were packed tight. Second, famine. Just a few decades earlier, the Great Famine had struck Northern Europe. Years of bad weather destroyed crops. A generation of children grew up malnourished. Their immune systems were weak. They were biologically unprepared to fight a new enemy. Third, sanitation. Medieval cities were incredibly dirty by modern standards. Waste flowed in the streets. Animals lived inside houses. And crucially, rats were everywhere. The black rat, Rattus rattus, loves to live near humans. It loves the thatched roofs of English cottages. It loves the grain stores of merchant ships. So, when the plague arrived, it found a population that was crowded, weak, and living with the enemy. Let's trace the movement. From Sicily, the disease jumped to the great trading cities of Italy, Genoa and Venice. Notice the pattern. The plague did not walk randomly across the fields. It followed the money. It traveled along the trade routes. A trade route is a logistical network identified as a series of pathways and stoppages used for the commercial transport of cargo. The plague moved as fast as a ship could sail. It hit Marseille in France. Then it hit the ports of Spain. By 1348, it was knocking on the door of England. Let's pause to learn a vital English phrase. To catch on. Usually, this means to become popular. For example, this song caught on quickly. But in the context of disease or fire, it implies spreading or igniting. Panic began to catch on across Europe. People realized this was not a normal sickness. Doctors were helpless. They wore beak-like masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing the disease was spread by miasma, bad air. Miasma is an unpleasant or unhealthy smell or vapor. They were wrong. It wasn't the air. It was the flea. But their fear was rational. Now, let's cross the English Channel. The date is June 13, 48. A ship arrives in the port of Melcombe Regis in the county of Dorset, on the south coast of England. The sailors come ashore. One of them is sick. Within days, people in the town begin to die. The local priest records the deaths in the parish register. His handwriting, usually neat, becomes shaky. The plague has breached the island fortress of England. It moves inland quickly. It travels along the roads built by the Romans, which were still used for trade. It heads for the biggest prize of all, London. London in 1348 was a city of noise, smell, and density. About 70,000 people lived there. It was the commercial heart of the kingdom. Ships from all over the world docked in the Thames River. The streets were narrow and dark. Wooden houses leaned over the alleys, blocking out the sun. The gutters were filled with filth. It was the perfect killing ground. When the plague arrived in London in the autumn of 1348, the city stopped. Imagine the silence. The church bells, which usually rang the hours, began to ring constantly for funerals. Eventually, they stopped ringing altogether because there were too many dead and not enough ringers. The king, Edward III, fled the city. The rich fled to their country estates, but the poor had nowhere to go. They were trapped in the urban center. Urban relates to, or is characteristic of, a city or town. In the cramped urban tenements, entire families died together. The phrase, "bring out your dead," became a terrifying reality. Carts rolled through the streets at night, collecting bodies. There were no coffins left. People were buried in mass graves. In Smithfield, just outside the city walls, archaeologists have found these plague pits. Skeletons stacked like firewood. These were not proper Christian burials. They were disposal operations. This reflects the sheer mortality rate. Mortality rate is the number of deaths in a given area or period, or from a particular cause. In London, nearly half the population died. Imagine your street. Imagine half the houses empty, half your friends gone, half your family. This level of death breaks the social contract. A social contract is an implicit agreement among the members of a society to cooperate for social benefits. Normally, servants obey masters, peasants obey lords, children obey parents. But when death is everywhere, the rules dissolve. Why work in the fields if you will die tomorrow? Why pay rent? Why obey the law? A strange mood took over England. It wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of reckless madness. Some people prayed constantly, whipping themselves to atone for their sins. Others drank and gambled, deciding to enjoy their last days. The structure of feudalism, the rigid hierarchy of kings, lords, and peasants, began to crack. The supply chain of food broke down. Wheat rotted in the fields because there were no reapers to harvest it. Sheep wandered aimlessly because the shepherds were dead. Prices fluctuated wildly. First, food was expensive because of the shortage. Then, it became cheap because there was no one left to buy it. But the most important economic shift was about to happen. And it came from a surprising source: the value of labor. For centuries, the English peasant was powerless. He was tied to the land. He had to work for the Lord for almost nothing. He was easily replaceable because there were so many people. But now, the survivors looked around. The fields were empty. The lords were desperate for workers. For the first time in history, the peasant realized, I am valuable. The supply of workers had crashed. The demand for workers was high. You know the rule of economics. When supply is low and demand is high, the price goes up. The Black Death, in its cruel way, gave birth to the English working class. It planted the seed of freedom in the soil of disaster. But the ruling class would not give up power easily. They passed laws to stop the peasants from asking for higher wages. They failed. The collision between the rising power of the workers and the stubborn laws of the king would lead to an explosion. But before we see that revolution, we must understand the emotional landscape of the survivors. How do you rebuild a world when half the pieces are missing? The year is 1349. The worst of the dying is over, but the silence is deafening. England is a graveyard. The survivors walk through empty villages where the doors swing open in the wind. In English, we call these ghost towns. A ghost town is a deserted town with few or no remaining inhabitants. The psychological impact on the survivors was profound. They had seen the end of the world, yet they were still breathing. This created a complex mix of guilt, relief, and boldness. Let's look at the aftermath. Aftermath refers to the consequences or after effects of a significant unpleasant event. In the aftermath of the Black Death, the relationship between God and humanity changed. Before the plague, the Church was the ultimate authority. It promised protection. It explained the world. But the priests had died just like the sinners. The prayers had not stopped the buboes. People began to ask dangerous questions. Why did God kill the good priest and save the thief? If the Church cannot save us, who can? This doubt is the first crack in the foundation of the medieval mind. It didn't destroy religion, but it made it personal. It paved the way for future changes like the Reformation. But the most immediate change was in the wallet. Let's focus on the economic reality. We mentioned the shortage of workers. In economics, we call this labor scarcity. Scarcity is the state of being scarce or in short supply. Shortage. Imagine a lord, Lord Thomas. Before the plague, he had 100 peasants working his land. He paid them pennies. If one complained, He kicked him out and hired another. Now Lord Thomas has only 30 peasants left. The harvest is ready. If it isn't collected, he loses his wealth. He goes to a peasant, John. He says, "John, get to work." John looks at the empty field. He looks at Lord Thomas. And he says, "No, not for pennies. I want shillings." Lord Thomas is shocked. This is rebellion. But what can he do? If he kills John, he has 29 workers. So he pays. Across England, wages skyrocketed. Carpenters, masons, and plowmen demanded double or triple their previous pay. They started eating better food. They wore better clothes. The government panicked. In 1351, King Edward III passed the Statute of Laborers. A statute is a written law passed by a legislative body. This law made it illegal to pay wages higher than pre-plague levels. It also made it illegal to refuse work. It was an attempt to turn back the clock. But you cannot legislate against supply and demand. The law was ignored. Peasants and lords made secret deals. The economy was shifting from a feudal system, based on service, to a cash economy, based on wages. Here's a phrase to remember: to gain leverage. To gain leverage means to get an advantage that allows you to influence a situation. The peasants had gained leverage. This shift changed the physical landscape of England. Because grain farming required so many workers, many lords switched to sheep farming. Sheep require less labor. You only need a few shepherds and dogs to manage a huge flock. So the fields of England turned from gold, wheat, to green, pasture. The wool trade boomed. England became the primary producer of high-quality wool for Europe. This wool was exported to Flanders and Italy to be made into cloth. This brings us back to trade. The Silk Road had brought the disease, but the recovery created new trade networks. The golden fleece became the symbol of English wealth. Even today, the Speaker of the House of Lords sits on the woolsack, a large red cushion stuffed with wool. It reminds them that the economy was built on the backs of sheep, in the vacuum left by the plague. But money brings conflict. The new confidence of the working class collided with the old arrogance of the ruling class. The tension grew for decades. The Statute of Laborers was hated. The poll taxes, taxes on every person regardless of income, were hated. The pot was boiling. In 1381, 30 years after the plague, the lid blew off. This is known as the Peasants' Revolt. It started in Essex and Kent. Thousands of peasants, led by a man named Wat Tyler, marched on London. They weren't a disorganized mob. They were disciplined. They had a clear political agenda. They burned tax records. They opened prisons. They entered London. They had a famous slogan, preached by a radical priest named John Ball. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? To delve means to dig the earth. To spin, span, means to make thread. The rhyme asks, in the beginning, where were the lords? Where was the inequality? It was a radical call for equality. The young King Richard II, only 14 years old, met the rebels at Smithfield, the same place where the plague victims were buried. The revolt was eventually crushed. Wat Tyler was killed. The leaders were executed. But the psychological victory belonged to the peasants. The fear of another revolt stopped the lords from pushing too hard. Serfdom, the system of unfree labor, quietly died out in England over the next century. The Black Death had broken the chains that the peasants could not break themselves. This is a recurring theme in history. Disruption leads to innovation. Disruption is disturbance or problems which interrupt an event, activity, or process. The plague was the ultimate disruption. It forced society to innovate, to find new ways to farm, new ways to pay, and new ways to live. But the changes weren't just economic, they were cultural. English as a language owes a debt to the plague. Before 1348, the language of the elite in England was French. The king spoke French, the courts spoke French. English was for the peasants. But the plague killed a disproportionate number of the clergy and the teachers, who were the guardians of Latin and French. They were replaced by people who spoke English. Also, the rise of the merchant class, who spoke English, pushed the language into positions of power. By 1362, the statute of pleading allowed English to be used in courts. The language you are learning right now, the language of Shakespeare and the Internet, rose from the ashes of the pestilence. So, we have seen the horror, the economic shift, and the social revolution. But what about the science? Did they ever learn how to stop it? The answer is yes. And the solution they invented is a word we all learned very well in 2020. It started in another port city, on the other side of the Adriatic Sea. The city of Dubrovnik, then called Ragusa. They realized that they couldn't cure the disease. They couldn't pray it away. But they could pause it. They invented a system of waiting. The year is 1377. We are in the Republic of Ragusa, known today as Dubrovnik, Croatia. The city is a fortress of white stone, rising from the blue Adriatic Sea. It is a trading rival to Venice. Ships arrive daily from the east, carrying silk, spices, and the constant threat of plague. The Great Council of Ragusa faces a terrible choice. If they close the port, the city dies of poverty. If they keep the port open, the city dies of plague. They need a middle path. They need a way to filter the trade. They pass a revolutionary law. It states that any ship arriving from a plague-infected area must not enter the city immediately. Instead, it must drop anchor at a nearby island and wait for 30 days. They call this period Trentino, 30. The logic is simple. If the crew is still healthy after 30 days, the ship is safe. If the disease is on board, it will reveal itself, and the ship will be burned or turned away. Later, the Venetians adopt this practice. They extend the waiting period to 40 days. In Italian, 40 is quaranta. From this, we get the English word quarantine. Quarantine is a state, period, or place of isolation in which people or animals that have arrived from elsewhere or been exposed to infectious or contagious disease are placed. This was a massive intellectual leap. It shifted the focus from cure to prevention. It was the birth of public health. Public health is the science of protecting and improving the health of people and their communities. The Venetians built massive quarantine stations called lazarettos on islands in their lagoon. These were not hospitals. They were holding pens. They were the border control of biology. Passengers were stripped, washed with vinegar, and their clothes were smoked with aromatic herbs. Goods were aired out. This introduced a new concept to trade: risk management. Merchants hated it. Quarantine cost money. A ship sitting idle for 40 days is not making profit. The goods might spoil. The crew still needs to be fed. But they accepted it because the alternative was total shutdown. This tension between commerce and safety is timeless. We see it in airport security today. We see it in food regulations. The English adopted these ideas slowly. Being an island gave them a natural quarantine, but ships still slipped through. Let's return to England and look at how the language of trade evolved during this period of recovery. As the economy became more complex, English vocabulary expanded to handle it. We gained words from Italian, the language of banking. Bank comes from the Italian banca, meaning bench or counter, where money changers sat. Credit comes from credito, meaning belief or trust. You give credit to someone you trust. Bankruptcy comes from banca rotta, broken bench. If a banker could not pay his debts, his bench was physically broken in the public square. A vivid image of failure. This vocabulary shows that trade was becoming institutionalized. It was moving from the chaotic bazaars of the Silk Road to the ledger books of London and Florence. But while the humans were organizing, the bacteria was evolving too. The Black Death was not a one-time event. It was a recurring nightmare. It came back in 1361, 1369, 1375, and regularly for the next 300 years. Londoners lived with the constant shadow of the plague. It became part of the rhythm of the city. In English, we have a phrase, to plague someone. It means to cause continual trouble or distress to. Example, he was plagued by financial problems. This metaphorical use comes from the reality of the disease. So, how did London adapt? The city began to change its architecture. The Great Fire of London in 1666 is often credited with cleaning the city. But the changes started earlier. People began to understand that filth was dangerous. In 1388, the Parliament in Cambridge passed the first nationwide Sanitary Act. It prohibited the throwing of dung, garbage, and intestines into ditches, rivers, and waters. The English word sanitary relates to the conditions that affect hygiene and health. It was a small step. London was still dirty, but the connection between environment and health was being made. Let's pause and look at a specific object that symbolizes this era: the Bill of Mortality. In the late 16th and 17th centuries, London began printing weekly lists of deaths. These were sold for a penny. They listed how many people died and from what cause. Griping in the guts, king's evil, plague. These bills are the ancestors of modern data analytics. Merchants used them to decide if it was safe to come to London. If the plague numbers were high, the rich left town. This is data-driven decision-making in its infancy. The bills also gave us a grim idiom: Clean Bill of Health. Originally, this was a document issued to a ship's captain, certifying that the port of departure was free from infectious disease. Today, it means a doctor finds you healthy. The story of the Silk Road and the Black Death teaches us that globalization is a double-edged sword. A double-edged sword is a situation or course of action having both positive and negative effects. The trade brought silk, spices, and new ideas. It brought the compass and gunpowder. It enriched the world. But it also brought the rat and the flea. This duality is essential to understanding history. Progress is rarely pure. Every connection is a potential infection. But humanity is resilient. Resilient means able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. We didn't stop trading. We didn't stop traveling. Instead, we built systems to manage the risk. We built quarantines. We built better ships. We built cleaner cities. We adapted. And in that adaptation, England transformed from a feudal backwater into a global trading power. The labor shortage forced innovation. The wool trade built capital. The Port of London became the new hub, replacing the old hubs of the Mediterranean. By the 1600s, the center of gravity had shifted north. But before we conclude, we must look at one final, fascinating connection. The connection between the Black Death and the English pub. Yes, the pub. How did a mass extinction event lead to the cozy British public house? The English pub is a national institution, a place of warmth, beer, and conversation. But its roots are entangled with the social changes triggered by the plague. Before the Black Death, brewing ale was a domestic activity. It was done by women, known as alewives, in their own kitchen. They would put a broomstick outside the door to signal that a fresh batch was ready. Neighbors would come in, pay a penny, and drink. In the alewife's home. But after the plague, the economy changed. Wages went up. People had more disposable income, but there were fewer people. The surviving alewives realized they could scale up. Instead of just a kitchen, they could create a dedicated space. They could offer food. They could offer beds for travelers who were moving around the country for better wages. The domestic became commercial. Domestic relates to the running of a home or to family relations. Commercial is concerned with, or engaged in, commerce. These new establishments became public houses, or pubs for short. Because the old feudal bonds were broken, people were more mobile. A peasant wasn't stuck in his village anymore. He might walk to the next town for work. He needed a place to stay and socialize. The pub became the third place. Sociologists use this term. First place equals home. Second place equals work. Third place equals the social environment, the pub, the cafe. In these pubs, the new English language flourished. Travelers from different regions mixed their dialects. The North met the South. The vocabulary of trade mixed with the vocabulary of the farm. Here is a phrase you might hear in a pub. To seal the deal. This means to come to an agreement. Historically, deals were sealed with a wax seal on a document. But in the pub, they were sealed with a handshake and a drink. The pub was also a place of news. In a world without newspapers, the traveler was the internet. He brought stories of the plague in London, of the wars in France, of the prices of wool. So, the plague created the economic conditions, higher wages, mobility, that allowed the pub culture to thrive. But let's zoom out again. We have focused heavily on England, but the Silk Road was a global system. What happened to the other end of the line? What happened to the Mongols who started it all? The Black Death destroyed the Mongol Empire. The Pax Mongolica collapsed. The trade routes became unsafe again. The Golden Web was torn apart. Why? Because the plague killed the bureaucracy. It killed the soldiers. It killed the tax collectors. Without the tax revenue from the trade, the Khans couldn't pay their armies. The local warlords rebelled. The empire fractured into small, warring states. This collapse had a massive, unintended consequence for Europe. With the land route to China closed, or too dangerous, the Europeans were cut off from the silk and spices they had grown to love. They had an addiction to luxury goods. Addiction is the fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. They couldn't go east by land anymore. The Ottomans were rising in Turkey, blocking the path. So, the Europeans looked at the map. They looked at the ocean. They asked a crazy question. If we can't go east by land, can we go west by sea to get to the east? The closing of the Silk Road, caused by the plague, forced Europe to look at the Atlantic Ocean. It triggered the Age of Exploration. Columbus didn't sail in 1492 just because he was curious. He sailed because the old supply chain was broken. He was looking for a workaround. Workaround is a method for overcoming a problem or limitation in a program or system. He wanted to reconnect the wire that the plague had cut. So, you can draw a direct line from the flea on the marmot in Kyrgyzstan to the ships of Christopher Columbus. History is a chain reaction. Let's review the chain. Climate change in Asia leads to fleas move to rats, leads to rats join caravans, leads to trade routes spread disease, leads to Europe loses 50% of people, leads to labor shortage, leads to rise of wages, leads to collapse of feudalism, leads to rise of the merchant class, leads to collapse of Mongol Empire, leads to blockage of trade routes, leads to desire for new routes, leads to discovery of the Americas. It is dizzying, isn't it? This is why we study history, not to memorize dates, but to see the causality. Causality is the relationship between cause and effect. Now, let's bring this back to language. The Age of Exploration brought a tsunami of new words into English. From Arabic, via trade, admiral, alcohol, cotton, sugar, zero. From Hindi, via later trade, shampoo, pajamas, jungle, bungalow. From Native American languages, via exploration, potato, tomato, chocolate, tobacco. English is a vacuum cleaner. It sucks up words from every culture it touches. This makes English a trade language, or a lingua franca. Lingua franca is a language that is adopted as a common language between speakers whose native languages are different. Originally, the lingua franca was a specific pidgin language used in the Mediterranean ports. But today, English itself is the global lingua franca. And it achieved this position because of the commercial power that began to grow after the Black Death. Let's look at a specific English word that embodies this global movement: traffic. Originally, in the 1500s, traffic meant trade or commerce. To have traffic with someone meant to trade with them. Later, it came to mean the movement of people and vehicles, and today it means visitors to a website. The meaning shifted from the deal to the movement to the data. But the core idea remains: flow. The flow of value. The Silk Road was the first high-speed traffic lane. Now, I want to take you to a specific location in London that connects the plague, the fire, and the trade. The Monument to the Great Fire of London. It stands near the northern end of London Bridge. It is a tall stone column. If you climb the 311 steps to the top, you can look out over the City of London. You see the skyscrapers of the financial district, the Gherkin, the Shard, the Walkie-Talkie. These strange glass towers are the cathedrals of modern commerce. They are the descendants of the medieval market stalls. Inside them, trillions of dollars move every day. But if you look down into the shadows of the streets, you can still see the medieval layout. The streets are narrow and winding. They follow the old cow paths, and beneath the pavement, the plague pits are still there. The bones of the 1,348 victims are sleeping beneath the foundations of the global banks. It is a poetic reminder. Our modern wealth is built on top of ancient tragedy. The resilience of London is legendary. It survived the plague. It survived the Great Fire. It survived the Blitz in World War II. In English, we have an adjective for this: indomitable. Indomitable means impossible to subdue or defeat. The indomitable spirit of the city. But let's not get too romantic. The connection brings risk. We learned this again recently. The supply chains of the 21st century are just faster versions of the Silk Road. A factory closes in China, and a shop runs empty in Chicago. A virus jumps in an airport, and a lockdown happens in Melbourne. The lesson of the Silk Road is that there is no over there. There is only here. We are all in the same room. In the next part, we will explore the cultural legacy of this trauma. How did the Black Death change art, literature, and the way we think about death? And we will learn the vocabulary of mortality and remembrance. The year is 1350. The immediate panic has subsided, but the culture of Europe has been permanently scarred. When you walk into a medieval church in England, look at the walls. You might see paintings of skeletons dancing with kings, bishops, and peasants. This genre of art is called the danse macabre, the dance of death. The message was brutal and simple. Death is the great equalizer. Equalizer is a person or thing that equalizes something, especially by removing a distinct advantage. Before the plague, art was focused on the glory of heaven. After the plague, art became obsessed with the rotting reality of the body. Why? Because everyone had seen it. You couldn't hide from it. The English literature of the time reflects this shift. We see the rise of a new voice, the voice of the common man, full of skepticism and humor. The greatest writer of this era was Geoffrey Chaucer. He wrote the Canterbury Tales in the late 1300s. Chaucer is often called the father of English literature. He was the first to write a major work in the vernacular English, not Latin or French. Vernacular is the language or dialect spoken by the ordinary people in a particular country or region. The Canterbury Tales is a story about a group of pilgrims traveling to the shrine of Thomas Becket in Canterbury. Look at the characters. A knight, a miller, a cook, a wife of Bath. They are a cross-section of society. Chaucer portrays them with warts and all. Warts and all is an idiom meaning including features or qualities that are not appealing or attractive. The miller is drunk. The summoner has skin disease. The pardoner is a fraud, selling fake holy relics. This cynicism was a product of the post-plague world. People had seen the institutions fail. They were ready to laugh at authority. Chaucer's English is difficult for modern readers, but you can still hear the rhythm. When that April with his shores sute, when April with its sweet showers. He captured the sound of London, the sound of a city that was alive, messy, and rebounding. Let's learn a literary term. Satire. Satire is the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices. Chaucer used satire to critique the church and the nobility. He could get away with it because the social order was loose. This cultural shift also affected architecture. Before the plague, the style was decorated Gothic, very complex with lots of carving. After the plague, the style shifted to perpendicular Gothic. It was simpler. It emphasized vertical lines. Why? Some historians argue it was because there were fewer stone carvers left alive. The style had to adapt to the labor shortage. Necessity is the mother of invention. This proverb means that difficult situations inspire ingenious solutions. The English language also began to acquire words related to fate and luck. Hazard comes from an Arabic game of dice, al-zar, brought back by crusaders and traders. It came to mean a risk or danger. Risk itself comes from the Italian risco, meaning danger, often related to sailing. The vocabulary of the English language is a map of human experience. It records our fears. Let's return to the concept of the caravan. We started this journey with the caravan in Central Asia, but by the 1400s, the caravan had changed. The ships of the desert, camels, were being replaced by the ships of the sea, carracks and caravels. The English were late to this game. The Portuguese and Spanish were the first explorers. But when the English joined, they brought a new innovation, the joint stock company. This is a crucial economic concept. In the old days, one merchant took all the risk. If his ship sank, he was ruined. But in a joint stock company, many people buy shares. Share refers to a part or portion of a larger amount, which is divided among a number of people. If the ship sinks, you only lose your share. But if the ship returns with spices, you get a share of the profit. This model allowed England to fund massive expeditions. It allowed them to compete with the Spanish Empire. The most famous was the East India Company, founded in 1600. It was, in many ways, the successor to the Silk Road. But instead of a road, it was a maritime network. And instead of carrying plague, though it sometimes did, it carried influence. The English language traveled on these ships. It landed in India. It landed in Virginia. It landed in Australia. This is why you are learning English today. Not because it is the best language, but because it was the language of the trade network that won the global competition. It is a legacy of history. Legacy is something left or handed down by a predecessor. But let's go back to the biology for a moment. The Black Death eventually faded from Europe. The last major outbreak in London was in 1665, the Great Plague. Why did it stop? Scientists have many theories. 1. The brown rat, Rattus norvegicus, replaced the black rat. The brown rat is less friendly to humans and stays in the sewers, further away from people. 2. Humans developed some genetic resistance. 3. Hygiene and quarantine improved. 4. The bacteria itself mutated to be less deadly. Probably it was a combination of factors. But the fear remained. The word plague is still used today to describe anything terrible. A plague of locusts. Avoid it like the plague. Let's analyze that idiom. Avoid it like the plague. It means to ignore or keep away from something or someone completely. It is a linguistic fossil. It preserves the terror of the 14th century in our daily speech. Now, I want to pivot to a modern parallel. We live in a world of just-in-time delivery. Just-in-time is a management strategy that aligns raw material orders from suppliers directly with production schedules. It is super efficient. It saves money on storage. But, like the Silk Road, it is fragile. If one ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, as happened with the Ever Given in 2021, the whole world feels it. If a factory shuts down in Taiwan, car factories stop in Germany. The lesson of the Silk Road is that efficiency reduces redundancy. Redundancy is the inclusion of extra components which are not strictly necessary to functioning in case of failure in other components. In engineering, redundancy is good. It is a backup. In business, redundancy is seen as waste. The Black Death showed us the cost of having zero redundancy. When the farmers died, there was no backup food. When the priests died, there was no backup comfort. As you learn English, you are not just learning words, you are learning the code of this global system. Business English is the operating system of the modern Silk Road. Words like logistics, supply chain, margin, leverage, asset, liability. These are the tools of the trade. But remember the human element. Behind every unit of labor is a person. Behind every consumer is a family. The story of the plague is a story of human suffering on a massive scale. It reminds us to have empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. When we read history, we must have empathy for the people who lived through it. The mother in London in 1348, watching her child feverish in the cradle. She didn't know about bacteria. She didn't know about trade routes. She only knew fear. Yet, she survived, and her descendants built the world we live in. In the next part, we will explore how the Silk Road concept is being revived today. The new Silk Road. And we will solidify your vocabulary with a final synthesis of the themes movement, money, and microbes. We are standing at a railway depot in Barking, East London. It is a grey, industrial morning in January 2017. A train pulls slowly into the station. It looks like any other freight train, steel containers stacked on flatbed wagons. But this train is special. It has just travelled 7,500 miles, 12,000 kilometers. It started its journey in Yiwu, China. It crossed Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland, Germany, Belgium, and France. Finally, it crossed under the English Channel to arrive here. The journey took 18 days. This was the first direct freight train from China to the UK. It is the modern avatar of the caravan we met in Part 1. Journalists called it the New Silk Road. The Chinese government calls it the Belt and Road Initiative. Let's analyze the word initiative. An initiative is an act or strategy intended to resolve a difficulty or improve a situation. A fresh approach to something. Example: the government announced a new initiative to boost trade. This steel river is reconnecting the world in a way we haven't seen since the Mongol Empire. But instead of camels carrying silk, we have trains carrying socks, suitcases, and solar panels. The speed is increasing. Al-Hassan, the camel driver, took months to cross the steppes. The train takes 2 weeks. An airplane takes 10 hours. Data takes milliseconds. The English vocabulary for this is acceleration. Acceleration is the increase in the rate or speed of something. But remember our core thesis. Connectivity increases risk. If a train can bring cheap electronics to London, what else can it bring? In the 14th century, the unwanted cargo was the flea. In the 21st century, the unwanted cargo might be the Asian hornet. This is a real biological threat. The Asian hornet is an invasive species. It kills honeybees. It arrived in France in pottery shipments from China. Now, it is threatening the UK. In English, we call this an invasive species. An invasive species is an organism that causes ecological or economic harm in a new environment where it is not native. It is the same pattern. Trade moves biology. But there is a new layer to the Silk Road today. It is not just physical. It is digital. We talk about the digital Silk Road, the fiber optic cables that run under the oceans and across the continents. These cables carry the lifeblood of the modern economy, information. But they also carry the modern plague, malware. Malware, malicious software, is software that is specifically designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access to a computer system. In 2017, the same year the train arrived in London, a massive cyber attack called WannaCry hit the world. It spread through the digital trade routes. It infected computers in 150 countries. It hit the British National Health Service, NHS. Hospitals had to turn away patients. Ambulances were diverted. Doctors couldn't access patient records. Does this sound familiar? It was a digital pandemic. It didn't kill people directly like the Black Death, but it paralyzed the system. It exploited the interconnectivity of our software. The vocabulary of cybersecurity borrows heavily from the vocabulary of biology. We speak of computer viruses. We speak of antivirus software. We speak of infected files. We're using medieval metaphors to describe modern problems. This is why history is so powerful. It gives us a framework to understand the present. Let's look at a phrase that connects the past and the future. To pave the way. To pave the way means to create the circumstances to enable something to happen or be done. Example: the Silk Road paved the way for modern globalization. Literal meaning, to cover a road with stone or concrete. The Mongols paved the way for the Genoese. The Genoese paved the way for the English East India Company. The East India Company paved the way for the global internet economy. Each step made the world smaller. Each step made the wall between us and them thinner. Now, let's go deeper into the English of geopolitics. Geopolitics is politics, especially international relations, as influenced by geographical factors. The Silk Road has always been a geopolitical battlefield. In the 1800s, the British Empire and the Russian Empire struggled for control of Central Asia. The British called this the Great Game. They sent spies, mapped as merchants, into the mountains. They wanted to protect the route to India. Today, the Great Game is back, but now the players are China, the USA, Russia, and the EU. And the prize is not just spices, it is energy, rare earth minerals, and data. Rare earth minerals are chemical elements used in high-tech devices like smartphones and missiles. If you look at your phone right now, you are holding the Silk Road in your hand. The lithium might be from South America, the cobalt from Africa, the chip designed in California, the assembly in Shenzhen. It is a miracle of logistics. Logistics is the detailed organization and implementation of a complex operation. But it is fragile. If we look at the English language again, we see how it has become the operating system for this fragility. When a pilot flies a plane from Shanghai to London, they speak English to air traffic control. When a captain navigates a ship through the Suez Canal, the charts are in English. When a scientist publishes a paper on a new virus, it is in English. English has become the protocol. Protocol is the official procedure or system of rules governing affairs of state or diplomatic occasions. In computing, it is a set of rules governing the exchange or transmission of data. This gives you, the learner, immense power. By learning English, you are gaining access to the control room of the global machine. You are not just learning how to order a coffee. You are learning how to negotiate, how to analyze, and how to participate in the global conversation. But with power comes responsibility. We must ask ourselves, how do we build a resilient world? We learned the word resilient in Part 5. Let's expand on it. How do we build supply chain resilience? How do we build immune system resilience? The answer might lie in a concept called decentralization. Decentralization is the transfer of authority from central to local government. In systems, it means not having a single point of failure. The Black Death was so deadly because the systems were rigid. The Internet was designed to be decentralized, so that if one part is destroyed, the rest survives. Maybe the future of the Silk Road is not one big road, but a mesh of millions of small paths. Before we move to the final synthesis, let's visit one last location in London. We are going to the Chelsea Physic Garden. It was founded in 1673 as the Apothecary's Garden. An apothecary was a person who prepared and sold medicines and drugs, the ancestor of the pharmacist. Here, walled off from the noise of the city, grow plants from all over the world. Foxglove for the heart, periwinkle for cancer, cinchona bark, quinine, for malaria. These plants traveled along the trade routes, just like the plague, but they brought life, not death. The Columbian Exchange, trade between the Americas and the rest of the world, brought us potatoes and corn, which ended the cycle of famine in Europe. So, the ledger is balanced. On the debit side, plague, invasive species, exploitation. On the credit side, medicine, food, knowledge, culture. The ledger is never closed. We are still writing it. In the next part, Part 9, we are going to do a vocabulary deep dive. We will take the strongest words from our journey, words like quarantine, hub, fluctuation, commodity, and we will build advanced sentences with them. We will practice the language of consequence. This will be your masterclass in sounding like an articulate historian. Welcome to the engine room of the English language. We have traveled across continents and centuries. We have seen empires rise and fall. Now we must consolidate our gains. In language learning, passive vocabulary is what you understand when you hear it. Active vocabulary is what you can use yourself. My goal in this section is to move the words we have encountered from your passive memory to your active toolkit. We will focus on the language of consequence. These are the structures and words you use to explain why things happen and what the results are. This is essential for advanced English. Cluster 1. The commerce of movement. Keywords: commodity, infrastructure, hub, supply chain, logistics. Let's practice blending these. Level 1. Sentence: the merchants moved commodities like silk along the road. Level 2. Sentence: the Mongol infrastructure allowed commodities to move quickly between trade hubs. Level 3. Advanced: the fragility of the medieval supply chain meant that a disruption in a key logistic hub could cause price fluctuations across the continent. Practice tip: use infrastructure not just for roads, but for systems. The infrastructure of the internet. The infrastructure of public health. Cluster 2. The biology of risk. Keywords: vector, incubation, contagion, quarantine, mortality rate. Level 1. Sentence: the rat was a vector for the disease. Level 2. Sentence: because of the long incubation period, the contagion spread before anyone realized the danger. Level 3. Advanced: to lower the mortality rate, the city imposed a strict quarantine, effectively isolating the potential vectors from the general population. Note on contagion. This word can be used metaphorically. Financial contagion, when a bank crash spreads. Emotional contagion, when panic spreads in a crowd. Cluster 3. The mechanics of change. Keywords: convergence, fluctuation, scarcity, leverage, resilient. Level 1. Sentence: the scarcity of workers gave peasants leverage. Level 2. Sentence: a sudden fluctuation in the climate caused a convergence of rats and humans. Level 3. Advanced: the convergence of labor scarcity and social unrest allowed the working class to gain significant political leverage, making the economy more resilient in the long term. Word spotlight. Leverage. This is a high-power business word. Noun: we have leverage in this negotiation. Verb: we need to leverage our assets. use what we have to get more. Cluster 4. The historical assessment. Keywords: aftermath, legacy, precedent, catalyst, unintended consequence. We haven't explicitly defined precedent and catalyst yet, so let's do it now. Precedent. An earlier event or action that is regarded as an example or guide. The quarantine of Ragusa set a precedent for modern public health. Catalyst. A person or thing that precipitates an event. The plague was a catalyst for the end of feudalism. Let's build sentences. Level 3. Advanced. The Black Death was a tragic catalyst for social change. Its legacy is still visible in the architecture of London and the vocabulary of English. Level 3. Advanced. An unintended consequence of the trade network was the rapid spread of disease, a phenomenon that has no historical precedent in terms of scale. The grammar of cause and effect. To sound like a documentary narrator, you need specific connecting phrases. 1. Attributable to. The rise in wages was attributable to the labor shortage. 2. Paved the way for. The collapse of the Mongol Empire paved the way for European exploration. 3. Stemmed from. The panic stemmed from a lack of medical knowledge. 4. Exacerbated by. Made worse by. The plague was exacerbated by the crowded conditions in the cities. Your London Gritty Challenge. I want you to try a mental exercise. Look at the room you are in. Pick 3 objects. 1. A coffee cup. Ceramic, coffee beans, trade. 2. A smartphone. Rare earth minerals, supply chain. 3. A t-shirt. Cotton, textiles, labor. Now, construct a sentence connecting them to the global system. Example: this smartphone is a product of a complex supply chain, relying on logistics that are vulnerable to fluctuation, much like the silk trade of the past. If you can think like this, you are no longer translating from your native language. You are thinking in global English. The power of counterintuitive thinking. In English persuasive writing, we often use a counterintuitive structure. While common belief, the reality is surprising fact. While the Black Death was a tragedy, the reality is that it liberated the English peasant. While we think of the Silk Road as a path of wealth, the reality is that it was a highway for disease. Using while at the start of a sentence signals sophistication. It shows you can hold 2 opposing ideas in your head at the same time. Final vocabulary set. The human element. Empathy. Feeling with. Solidarity. Standing together. Inevitability. Certain to happen. Adaptability. Ability to change. Sentence. The inevitability of future pandemics requires global solidarity and a high degree of adaptability in our economic systems. You are now armed with the vocabulary of a historian, an economist, and a diplomat. In the final part, Part 10, we will bring our caravan to a halt. We will summarize the journey, look at the ultimate lesson of the Silk Road, and I will give you a final farewell from the London Gritty Chronicles. We have reached the end of the road. We started our journey with a single thread of silk in the hands of a merchant on the windswept steppes of Asia. We followed that thread as it was woven into a global web. We saw how that web pulled wealth across continents, but also how it transmitted the deadliest biological signal in human history. The story of the Silk Road and the Black Death is not just ancient history. It is the story of us. It is the story of the fundamental human dilemma. We crave connection, but connection hurts us. We build ships to trade, but the ships bring rats. We build the internet to share knowledge, but it shares lies. We build cities to cooperate, but they become breeding grounds for disease. Yet, look at the result. Europe did not die. It changed. It adapted. The horror of 1348 broke the chains of feudalism. It gave the common man a voice. It forced science to invent the quarantine. It pushed explorers to find new worlds. And it reshaped the English language into the powerful tool you are using today. In English, we have a phrase, the silver lining. This refers to a hopeful or comforting prospect in the midst of a difficulty. Every cloud has a silver lining. The Black Death was a very dark cloud, but the modern world is the silver lining. As you continue your English learning journey, remember that language is the ultimate Silk Road. It is a network. When you learn a new word, you are building a bridge to another mind. You are importing a concept. You are exporting an idea. You are becoming a merchant of meaning. Don't be afraid of the risks. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are just the fluctuations of the learning market. The world is vast, dangerous, and beautiful. It is waiting for you to explore it, to describe it, and to understand it. You now possess the vocabulary of commerce, of geography, of medicine, and of consequence. You have the tools to tell your own stories. From the plague pits of London to the high-speed trains of the new Silk Road, the lesson remains the same. We are better together than we are apart, even if it's risky. Thank you for traveling with the London Gritty Chronicles. Keep the supply chain of your curiosity open. Keep the channel of your mind clear. And never stop trading in the currency of words. I'm your narrator. This has been the story of medieval globalization. Class dismissed.